Okay, so as you can probably tell by the title of the video and the thumbnail of the video, we are going to be talking about something that, for as long as I can remember, really, has been asked for by basically everyone who has played and is a fan of Resident Evil, like a massive fan of. As you know, the original trilogy is incredible. Like, they're like the holy trinity. They're all really good, very iconic, very classic survival horror, and people love them. And yes, they've all received a more modern remake, more importantly the second and the third, and the third of which has received a bit of backlash with its changing of everything and cutting things out. But the two remake is held up, and the one remake is held up as very faithful and very, very good. But the question's always been there, are we going to get ports of the original trilogy to, PS4, PS5, Xbox One, Series X, PC as well? Because these things are available on older consoles. I believe you can get 1, 2, and 3 on PS3 and PlayStation Vita, which is the handheld PlayStation 3 console, basically. And I have one that's behind me somewhere. And that has the Resident Evil Director's Cut and Resident Evil 3 Nemesis on it. The 2 original isn't available on there for some reason in this country. I don't know why, but either way. And people want to see these games come back in some fashion, and I am one of those people 100%. But we're going to talk about what that could mean, what people could feel about them, introducing the old games to new players, because over the past, well, I believe ever since 7 came out, the Resident Evil series has just spiked in popularity, and it's a lot bigger than what it was back then. So we're going to talk about, the effect it could have on newer players and stuff like that, as well as, people like me who've played these games when they were originally there. So, yeah, let's get into it and talk about it. First and foremost, bringing these things back would be pretty well received, I would say. These games, yes, they are very old. They do kind of have a very old school looking graphic, as you can tell. These are PS1 games, after all. Camera angles isn't a thing that's completely gone away. Still nowadays there's new horror games that are made with this perspective. One that comes to mind immediately for me is a game that released this year called Tormented Souls, which I've actually picked up over the holiday period. I haven't played it myself yet, but I am getting around to it soon. So I'll probably make some videos on that as well when I've got around to playing it. But that game adopts the narrow corridors, limited inventory, camera angles of, the original 3 Resident Evil games, and that game is also heavily influenced by those games as well. Because looking at these games now, even though games aren't really played in this perspective or this kind of configuration anymore, they did have an impact on a lot of horror that we do see, nowadays. I think the closest you can get to a more modern experience of these games is probably Resident Evil 7. No, it's not camera angles or anything like that, but it's very condensed. Resident Evil 7 is very condensed, and if you remember playing a camera angle game back in the day, your vision is very limited. Things are coming for you off screen. You have to kind of remember where's the right way to go, because you have to memorize the maps. Yes, there is a map system in the game, but memorizing where the next corner is, where the right door is, without actually being able to see it until you get to it, is a very important factor of playing these games. You have to memorize things as best you can. They're not huge games. Resident Evil 7 isn't a huge game, but it still kind of has that. You don't know what's around the corner. You do need to remember where things are, because it's important that you do. You have a limited inventory, so you have to carry things around to make sure you're not over encumbered or can't pick up anything new. It is a very, I would say Resident Evil 7 is a very, very modernised version of the original game, in a sense of how it plays and the atmosphere of it. One thing that's a big kind of throw off, probably for new players and old players who have kind of grew up with the changes of gaming, is the controls. The controls are tank controls, We've all played games, especially if you're around my age or older than me, or maybe even younger than me. Maybe people do like playing retro games, I know people that do play, old school games more often than new ones. But the controls are a bit of a pain to deal with. I would say it's manageable if you've played. Well, if you play the Resident Evil 1 remake, you can kind of play it both ways. You can play it as a fixed camera tank controls kind of movement, or you can kind of play it with analog and it will just kind of turn you easily. That is a choice. So one thing I would say is, if they were going to port these games to modern consoles, or next-gen consoles, however you want to describe that, give people the option to use an analog or a directional pad. Obviously, it's completely down to the player. Then, do you want to have a more original experience and use a D-pad, or do you want to have a more modern experience and use a DualShock? There is a DualShock version of Resident Evil 2, I'm pretty sure, and it kind of does do that. It kind of does make it run a bit smoother. But give people the option if they really want to play it super old school or not, because I think that would help with bringing newer players into these games if there was an option to play it as a little bit more smoother than how it was before. But at the same time, that control scheme was part of what made it intense. You know, you had to kind of make sure you weren't stood in a stupid position and move yourself accordingly, else you would just die. So it is part of the original experience to have the old clunky controls, and I quite like it, to be honest. It takes a bit of getting used to, especially if you go from playing modern games to an old game, which I do quite often. You have to kind of just take a minute to get used to it all again. But the payoff is there, because it does, when you get used to it, it does feel quite smooth in a sense. One thing I actually do want to add to this is the 2 and 3, and kind of the 1 remakes as well. The original and the remakes are not, you know, it's not word for word, it's not scene for scene. They're original in their own senses, but they are the same game. There are things in the original 2 and the original 3, well, especially the original 3, that aren't in the remakes. You know, there's a lot of areas, especially again in the 3 original to the 3 remake, that aren't there. The clock tower area is gone. There's a section in the park with a huge snake in 3, gone from the remake. So and I really do direct this at the 3 remake and the 3 original specifically, but if they were to bring these, you know, original games to newer consoles, people would actually be able to experience the original full game. There are things like in the original 2 that are different in the remake. You know, that is a bit more accurate than the 3 remake, but at the same time, it does differ enough for it to be, you know, a different game. It is mostly the same, but there is things again that you would miss out on if you didn't play the original. So, you know, I always encourage people to, if there's a remake of a game coming and you're interested, play the original first. Like, this is how I stand with a couple remakes that are coming out soon, the Resident Evil 4 remake and the Dead Space remake. Play the originals first, get that original feel, and then when the remake does release, you know, you have something to base it on and compare it to. I always like doing that with a remake, just kind of seeing what actually changed and what didn't. But yeah, there's a lot of things missing from the remakes. You know, 1, 2, and 3 really. Less so 1. 1 is pretty close. But 2 and 3, there are things missing in the remakes that people probably would want to experience. It is pretty nice to see. But even, you know, separately from, you know, 1, 2, 3, there is other older games that people want to see come back. You know, there's a lot of talk of Resident Evil Outbreak coming back. That is a multiplayer game, if you didn't know, and that is a massive conversation in the whole Resident Evil multiplayer topic, which is a completely separate thing. I've made a video on it before, but for most people, Resident Evil is a solo experience and should only be a solo experience. You know, it makes sense in the tone of the games and the position you're in. It makes sense that you're on your own. But if there was to be a multiplayer game that releases, people would want it to be co-op rather than competitive. People weren't really liking the idea of Reverse, where it's just like the iconic characters duking out in their own arena, turning into bioweapons and stuff. People thought it was dumb. How I stand on Reverse is, at the end of the day, you're not paying for it, really. It's free with Village. You're not paying for Village to get Reverse. I don't think anyone was paying for Village to get Reverse. It was just part of it. And if that does come out, I'll still probably play and give it a go. It is free. But I would understand it if Reverse was a game that was coming out that you had to pay for separately. I would completely get that. But it's not, so, you know. But anyway, people want a multiplayer experience in Resident Evil that is co-op. You know, look at 5 and 6. Good games. 6 maybe not a good Resident Evil game, but it's a good game. It plays nice and it's fun to play with a friend, but 5 and 6 are what a Resident Evil game needs in multiplayer, a co-op experience. I have a friend of mine, a very close friend of mine, that has just gone into Resident Evil recently. He played 7 last year for the first time and loved it, and he just got Village for the Christmas period. And I would love it if a Resident Evil game released in the future, you know, that was co-op. Obviously, I'll do it. New Resident Evil games co-op, let's play it together, it'll be fun. But a PvP game the interest is a little lower, because I'm not really a big PvP guy anymore. I used to play a lot of PvP, but now I can't really play it that much. So I would also rather have a co-op thing, but you may do with what you got, you know. But Outbreak is something people want to see, because it's a co-op game from back in the day, PS2, I believe. So having that either ported to new systems with like an actual online service, like a server or something like that, or a remake of that with, you know, an overhaul in the graphics and the gameplay with, again, multiplayer, would be something that people would really want to see. But yeah, overall, there's a lot of games that people want to see come back from way back in the day when the series was quite new. I think the 3 originals is probably what people want to see the most, and again, I am one of those people that does want that to happen. The games aren't particularly accessible anymore unless you have a PC, because then you can kind of emulate them and stuff like that. But for people who are on console, who primarily play console like me, they're not as easily accessible, and the only way I can really play them is on the Vita, which is back there, and that's only 1 and 3, which is not a complaint. I can play these games whenever I want. I usually sit and play it in bed. But having them on newer consoles would be really good. And obviously there is a solution. If you really want to play them, you can probably go out and get a cheap PS1, and the copy of the game, it's probably going to run you about 80 to 100. I think I checked like last week. It's usually like £100 for the game and the console, which is still pretty steep, especially considering how old they are. But there's options out there if you really want to play them. But it would be simpler just to release them on new platforms, but we'll have to wait and see. It's something that could potentially happen. I do think it could happen. And I see no reason why they wouldn't, because I think it would make them a lot of money to do this, so we'll have to see. But anyway, that will basically do with it. Do let me know your thoughts on the original trilogy. Have you played them? Have you not? Do you want to see them ported? I'm sure most of you do. Do you not want to see them ported? Do you think the remakes are good enough? Do you think the remakes will do? Let me know. But yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you all tomorrow.